Right now, I want to welcome in studio tonight a man who was on Capitol Hill today, not talking about H.R. 22, although he's been there and done that. Dave Kopel, the research director at the Independence Institute out in Colorado, is with us. And Dave, thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me. It's fun to be here in person.
You were one of those who testified, I guess, in favor of H.R. 822 before the Commerce Committee, right?
But one of the before one of the subcommittees of House Judiciary back in September. So that was the way things work in Congress usually is they'll have a subcommittee do the actual hearing with witnesses, and then they go to the full committee to mark up bills that they like, to add amendments or do whatever changes.
Okay. And by the way, as I'm looking here at the link that Dave Workman is writing about, this was actually a vote this afternoon, and I'm not sure this was the final vote, providing for consideration of H.R. 822, the National Right to Carry Reciprocity Act. That was the vote to open up the debate.
I think that would be the vote to approve the rule that came out of the Rules Committee that will govern what amendments are in order on H.R. 822, things like that.
Okay, so we may need to hold up here on the touting that the final vote was held, because I think the final vote should take place tomorrow, but we'll see if we can figure this out. In the meantime, you were on Capitol Hill talking about the Fixed Gun Checks Act. What is this piece of legislation, Dave?
This is a bill sponsored by Senator Schumer, co-sponsored by Senator Gillibrand, who was also known as Senator Schumer's alter ego in most cases, and by Senator Kerry of Massachusetts, which would, despite its name, impose a drastic amount of very extreme restrictions on law-abiding gun owners.
All right, I know that Mayor Bloomberg was scheduled to testify in support of this bill, but the Occupy movement kind of got away from him today, so he was up in New York. But he approves of this legislation, which automatically makes me a little bit suspicious of it.
Oh, I think the legislation is really coming from his organization, Illegal Mayors Against Guns.
Okay, so what would this bill do? Not what would it quote unquote fix, but what would it do for gun owners?
Well, it would say
gun owners.
It would say you can't transfer a firearm unless the transfer goes through a federally licensed firearms dealer or or law enforcement. And
so no private transfers of firearms.
Yes, but putting aside that issue, it defines transfer so broadly so that a temporary transfer of custody would count. So let's imagine that after the show, you invite me over to your house and you show me your gun collection, and I pick up one of the guns and I hold it for a few minutes. That would be a transfer, and since you hadn't put me through a background check, that would be a federal felony. Likewise, if let's imagine you owned a nice farm out in Virginia, and you invite me over and we go target shooting in your back 40 acres, and you loan me one of your guns for just for the target shooting. That would be an illegal transfer according to this law. And again, you and I, but especially you, would be a federal felon for not having background checked me before we went target shooting.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, that's not going to work. I don't think that's going to work for anybody except perhaps Mayor Bloomberg, Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, and Senator Kerry.
Well, it depends on what you mean by work. If you mean turning American gun owners into felons who can be sort of prosecuted at will, because you're talking about acts that almost everybody does at some time, then that works really well.
All right, we've actually got a clip of you and Senator Schumer talking about this piece of legislation earlier today.
Let me just give a quick preview on this.
Yeah.
Among the things this bill also does is it says that every federally funded university, which is all of them almost, has to set up this team of people who will make involuntary referrals of students for mental health counseling, and further says that the referrals have to be reported into the National Instant Check System database. So that's what we were talking about. And
okay.
It has other language elsewhere that also says that other counseling orders have to make you ineligible to own a gun.
All right, let's take a listen.
Senator, it's on pages 8 through 10 of the bill, where you require that all federally funded universities have to set up this team which will order people to go to involuntary counseling. That's what The bill says.
That's a different part of
Yes,
the bill.
and once they are ordered to go into involuntary counseling, and of course it's not really involuntary in the sense that you can't drag them in, they could just drop out of school instead. But your bill says when the school orders somebody into involuntary counseling, that itself is what's supposed to be reported to NICS.
I understand that. But my point's being that you can't be ordered into involuntary counseling very easily. There's a whole procedure that has to be done, certainly under New York state law, and I believe under most state law.
Well, not under your bill. Your bill says you
No,
have...
but my bill refers to the state's decision.
No, your bill refers to the university's decision. That's what Section 124 of the bill
Which is sanctioned
does.
by state law.
Senator, that's just not in the bill. Your bill makes
That's the part you're referring to relates to mental health programs. The part about ordering it into NICS is the part I read back here on page 7. Anyway,
Senator, very quickly.
Go ahead.
Page,
Let
not,
you get the last
page 9, go down to line 17, subsection 5. Every federally funded university, a procedure for making involuntary referrals for such students to state or local mental health authorities for mental evaluation, which shall include reporting such referrals to a state agency responsible for identifying persons described in Section 922G4 of Title 18 U.S. Code, which is the section that imposes the gun prohibition for mental conditions.
But you still need the state agency to approve it.
No, there's nothing, well, not in the bill as drafted. Perhaps you might want to revise it.
I got to say, Senator Schumer's entire political career could be summed up in that smarmy smile he gave you towards the end, like, nah, what do you think about that, Dave? I mean, you're telling him a problem in the bill. Or not even a problem. I mean, he might consider it to be a problem, but, this is what will happen with this. And he just refused to believe you. That somehow, if there's a problem, well, the states will take care of it. That seemed to be his attitude.
I think the difference was I've read the bill and he hasn't.
I have a feeling you may be right there with that, Mr. Kopel. So ultimately, what you're saying is under this particular provision that you were arguing about with Senator Schumer, if a university decided to take the steps of telling a student, we're worried about you, we're concerned about your well-being, you're either going to counseling or you're going to have to quit the school, that decision is what is reported.
Yes, the referral, the involuntary referral.
So it doesn't matter if the student says, to hell with you, I think I'm fine. If that's my choice, I'm going to drop out of school. That referral is going to follow him around the rest of his life.
That's right. Well, it must be reported. The bill, as I read, says that then the state agency that supplies data into NICS has to make sure that referral gets reported into the National Instant Check System.
So when the
psychiatrists, if the student goes to a psychiatrist, there's no mechanism for the confidential meeting with the psychiatrist, whatever the psychiatrist says one way or another, which is either you're crazy as a loon or you're just being persecuted by the dean because you're politically incorrect. That stays confidential in the psychiatrist's records. There's no mechanism anywhere in the law to harvest that from a psychiatrist. What gets harvested by the Schumer bill is the referral from the university. That's a public matter, and the university must make sure that gets reported to the state agency that then in turn reports disqualifications to NICS.
So, ultimately, and I think maybe this was an inconvenient truth for the senator, ultimately a university could simply take away your Second Amendment rights.
Yes. Under
this piece of legislation.
Yes, if they give you an involuntary referral to evaluation because they think you're dangerous.
Wow. That is...
Well, when you combine that with go to websites of, say, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education.
Yeah.
And they have horror stories, which are in my written testimony, about exactly these kinds of situations where, for example, a student, I believe at Hamline University, said after the Virginia Tech massacre, this gun ban on campus policy makes it easier for mass killers. And he got a mandatory referral to go to counseling. You have other cases where somebody on Facebook criticized the university's decision to build a parking garage, and he got a mandatory referral to counseling because he was supposedly so dangerous.
Okay, so clearly, despite what Senator Schumer said about the process being very, very difficult, a lot of steps that have to be taken. I mean, clearly this is happening where people are being referred for reasons that, on the surface anyway, appear to be absolutely ludicrous.
Yes, what Senator Schumer is thinking of is that in terms of actually making somebody go through counseling,
Yeah.
you could actually that is truly a very hard thing to ever happen to an adult, because usually it's as you said, if the student says, well, to heck with this, they can just leave the university. The university dean can't physically drag him
Right.
down to the psychologist's office. But he's confusing the very difficult situation of actually compelling someone with no choice to go to counseling from the very different situation which his bill is written around, which is something that somebody be ordered into counseling, although as a practical matter, you can't actually make them do it. Usually
Right.
they lose their job or just get kicked out of the university.
Yeah, but I mean, again, as far as the law is concerned, or this proposed legislation is concerned, that doesn't matter if they actually go. What matters is that a university decided that they should.
That's right.
And at that point, that's what's got reported to Nix. Wow. All right. So you were the only, as I understand it, the only opponent of this bill that
Yes.
testified today. Who were some of those who were speaking in favor of this bill?
Well, they had, since Mayor Bloomberg couldn't come, they had somebody else come from his office and essentially read the prepared testimony that Mayor Bloomberg was going to read. They had somebody from the Department of Justice who was providing technical information about the Nix system, somebody from a Washington criminal justice agency that does some of the reporting of that kind of information to Nix, and then one of the survivors of the mass murder in Tucson earlier this year, and Mayors Against Illegal Guns flew a bunch of them and their relatives in. So this really sort of the whole hearing was ultimately built around Mayors Against Illegal Guns, bringing in these people from Tucson who, of course, didn't understand what was in the bill. Some of them
Right.
came up to me afterwards and they said, "Oh, no, the bill doesn't really do this." And I said, "Well, have you read it?" And they'd say, "Oh, we read part of it." And so with one of them, I opened it up and we looked through it line by line.
Yeah.
And this person said, "Yeah, I don't agree with that," which is there's another portion in the bill. Federal law says you're a prohibited person if you're an illegal user of drugs. The Schumer bill would define that to include anyone who's been arrested on a drug charge in the past 5 years. And it doesn't matter what the disposition was. If the arrest turns out to have been erroneous, the person was found innocent, it's still a 5-year prohibition, the fact that you were arrested. And I showed that to one of the Tucson people, and she agreed that was something that went too far, and she didn't agree with that.
Really?
Yeah.
But that was after her testimony.
Well,
right?
she was one of the people
Or
who was
just-
just flown in to be in the hearing room. And,
Oh,
and
okay.
Illegal Mayors Against Guns had a big press conference with these people there afterwards.
Wow. I mean, that. So basically, the bill is going to try to make it as easy as possible to prohibit as many people as possible from legally owning a firearm. Yeah?
If you would presume that the drafters of the bill intended the consequences of everything they're doing, rather than simply drafting it in an extremely in a sloppy way and perhaps having unintended consequences. But obviously, the drug thing, that's not a result of bad drafting. That's good drafting to accomplish exactly that purpose, which is any arrest, regardless of the result, on a drug charge bans you from having a gun for 5 years.
I mean, that is truly turning it seems to me like that's truly turning the law on its head. If you are innocent until you're proven guilty, and if no charges are even brought against you, well, then how on earth can you be guilty of a crime in a court of law? So why on earth should you lose your rights because an arrest was made? I mean, take this out of the drug standpoint. I was just looking at a story. There's an armed citizen story out of Bakersfield, California that's been going on. DA ruled it was a case of self-defense, but the police made an arrest of the armed citizen, and then they turned the information over to the DA's office. The more they investigated, the more they determined that this was a case of self-defense. He shouldn't lose his gun rights. He shouldn't lose his right to keep and bear arms because he was arrested in the course of an investigation and ultimately exonerated. That's ridiculous.
Right. The arrest is the beginning of the process, not the end. And
Right.
The end is where a judge or jury makes a determination about whether the person's guilty or not.
So what do you think? I mean, over on the Senate side, is it possible that this bill gets out of committee, or do you think that, are they serious about pushing this? Is this Bloomberg's big legislative, does he hope to make this his big legislative achievement?
Well, it would seem to be in that, bringing in 36 people from Arizona and other relatives of victims of gun crimes. I'm sure it's like chump change to Mayor Bloomberg, but even so, that's still a lot of money.
Right.
That's a sign of a pretty big effort there.
Wow. Well, Dave, listen.
So it's up to Senator Leahy, by the way, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, to decide whether to have a markup on this bill or not. So Senator Leahy will make the decision about whether this bill moves to the next step, since he's the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Well, I sure am glad that you were there to testify about some of the facts in this bill, because it sounds like even the authors of the legislation needed a refresher on this.
Or an introductory class, perhaps. But and folks want to read my written testimony, it'll be on my website, probably starting Thursday, davekopel.org.
All right, Dave, as always, sir, a real pleasure to talk with you. Glad we could see you in studio tonight, and thanks again for coming down to D.C. to testify today.
I love being here in the studio, the finest radio studio in the known universe.